let's move to a more important story in terms of domestic politics, which is how Americans are feeling about all of this that is happening in front of us. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. So this is some pretty extraordinary polling that has just come out from Gallup. And I want to actually spend some time here. Americans' views of Israel's military action in Gaza by subgroup. So if you look at it by adults, it's 50% approve, 45% disapprove. I think very different than how most people would look in the media. When you start to break it down, though, by age, it's extraordinary. 18 to 34, in that age group, you have 30% approve, 67% disapprove. 35 to 54, so Gen X, you have 50 approve, 44% disapprove. And then amongst boomers, it's more significantly 63% approve, 34% disapprove. I do think, though, if you look at the breakdown where things really split, it's party ID. So you've got 71% of Republicans who approve of the Israeli military actions in Gaza, 23% disapprove. Amongst independents, it's almost entirely equally split. 47% approve, 48% disapprove. Amongst Democrats, absolutely extraordinary to see this number. 36% approve, 63% disapprove. And of course, a Democrat is currently in the White House. Now, you shouldn't conduct all foreign policy just based upon what your party wants necessarily. But Krystal, this does highlight something that we've been trying to bring attention to here, which is not even just young voters per se, but many Democrats who may feel very differently about the Israel conflict, who don't see their views really represented in the government that is, or at least in the party and the president that they are aligned with, in a critical election year. And I thought that that was the biggest red sign I've seen yet for President Joe Biden, on top of all of his other problems. It explains why Trump right now is in the best position to win re-elections for any Republican since George W. Bush in 2004.
And it's not just that they don't see their view reflected in the United States government. And by the way, of course, consistently from the beginning, the overwhelming majority of Americans, some 2/3 of Americans, have supported a ceasefire. Not only do they not see those views reflected in large numbers outside of a few courageous members of Congress, but they've been treated with absolute contempt, smeared as Hamas or terrorist sympathizers, smeared as anti-Semites. There's a new resolution up in the House to equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, which is absolutely preposterous. Now, I did see Jerry Nadler and some others speaking out against that. That is good to see. But that is the level of contempt that, young people and people of color, who that's the other interesting divide here, is that the two real divides in terms of support for Israel or opposition to what Israel is doing here were generational. So young people, far more disgusted with Israel's campaign in Gaza than older people. And then there's a huge racial divide as well. And you actually see this represented in the members of Congress who have been for a ceasefire effectively from the beginning. They're overwhelmingly on the younger side, and they're overwhelmingly people of color. There were effectively no white Democrats who calling for a ceasefire for quite some time. It took a while. So those two parts of the Democratic base, obviously being very large and very critical, is why then you see this huge party identification divide in terms of support for Israel. I also don't want to miss the top line here. You might look at it, okay, there's still a little bit of narrow, 50% support what Israel's up to, 45% opposed. That is a remarkable shift.
Yes, it is.
From not only the early days of this war, but from how Americans have viewed Israeli actions in the past for years and years of years. I mean, that should be sending shockwaves through DC, and I think it is. I mean, that's why you see these groups like AIPAC and Democratic Majority for Israel coming out and saying, we're going to spend all this money, we're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to try to quash any sort of dissent on this issue, because they can see the way that they are losing the messaging and propaganda war with young people. And they are even losing some of their grip on a uniformity of opinion, even in the mainstream press. So that's why you see such a freak out there. But yeah, for Biden, this is a complete disaster. You have far more Republicans supporting effectively his foreign policy than his own party. And you can only imagine, if this was Trump with the same policies as Biden, you would have like uniform Democratic opposition to what was going on here. So especially given the amount of propaganda people are consistently fed from the US press to see a 50-50 overall divide and to see these kind of generational and racial and party splits as well it's extraordinary. It really is a remarkable turn.
It's also important to know that is very different than even conflicts which have now become much more 50-50, or even in the case of Ukraine, have switched entirely in terms of how Americans feel about aid. If you look at the initial numbers on Ukraine, it was almost 90-10 in terms of people who were supportive of initial military aid. It took over a year, probably 18 months before reality started to set in, and we will talk quite a bit about that today. But nonetheless, from an electoral perspective, I think Biden certainly does face a problem. We flagged this report. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. Swing state Muslim leaders are now launching a campaign to, quote, abandon Biden in 2024. They're specifically trying to leverage the Muslim populations in Michigan, in Minnesota, Arizona, Wisconsin, Florida, and Georgia, and Nevada, and Pennsylvania, calling on the campaign, quote, abandon Biden, vowing to ensure Biden is a one-term president. Leaders have run separate pressure campaigns in these respective states, now are banding together to try and get the hashtag trending and to have organization. They say that the bubbling anger amongst Arab and Muslim Americans could threaten Biden's chances of re-election in many of these swing states in 2024 in key voting blocks. And one of the reasons why I think it really matters to break this down is the vote total in Georgia is only a couple of thousand. In Arizona, we're talking about 10,000 votes. If you combine Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, you only need 30, 40,000 votes to go in a different direction. And Trump is back in the White House, and 2020 looks a hell of a lot different. I don't think yet that a lot of political analysis has caught up with just the slimmest margins by which Biden even won the presidency in 2020 and how precarious his chances are. Even the White House, everybody seems to be swaggering, being like, oh, there's no way, or they're not taking it seriously. The DNC, a lot of the Democratic, chattering class. Just yesterday, we covered the story that they're anointing Biden the nominee from the state of Florida. They're not even allowing democracy or any of that to creep in. So I think they're going to get smacked in the face come October of 2024, Krystal, when all of this just comes to a head. And they're looking at their internals 3 weeks, 1 month out to election day, and they're going to be like, oh my God, this is a totally different election than we expected. Almost like a Hillary oh shit moment from 2016 that was happening, at least in some parts of her campaign, but she didn't want to listen to.
They still believe that this will just blow over, that young people, that Arab Americans, that Muslim Americans, when they're faced with the alternative of Trump and, his floating of a Muslim ban and wanting to ban from the country anyone who is Palestinian or supports the Palestinian cause, that they will suck it up and vote for Joe, that they'll move on, or they'll forget that any of this ever happened. And I just think that they're completely wrong in that. And the greatest effort that you see in order to win people over is not to change the policy, is not to try to allay their concerns. It's to effectively berate and shame them for, quote unquote, like voting to end democracy by not just getting on board with Joe Biden, who is complicit with these Israeli atrocities that we all see unfolding in front of our eyes every single day. So listen, you can make the lesser evil argument. That's fine. I do think Donald Trump is worse. I've been very clear about it. But it's always the responsibility of the voters rather than the responsibility of Joe Biden, his administration, and the party leadership. And frankly, I just don't think it's going to work this time. These Muslim leaders who are organizing this effort, they were asked about exactly this. And they said that they are not planning to vote for Donald Trump, though they recognize their effort to rally support against Biden could elevate the former president. But they said they're going to continue to have discussions about which candidate to throw their support behind as the primaries rapidly approach. Quote, we're not supporting Trump. We're not going to make the same mistake of thinking about President Biden the way we thought. We don't have two options. We have many options, and we're going to exercise that. So I think that the Biden administration underestimates this political groundswell of outrage at their peril. And it is not on the young people or the Arab American leaders or the Muslim leaders who are disgusted with this policy. If Biden loses, which he is on track to do, that is 100% going to be on Joe Biden, his team, and his policies with regard to Israel and also with regard to the economy.
Yes, exactly. Well, it will be. I think it'll be very, very multifaceted. And I'll speak up too for the non-voter. You don't owe anyone your vote. it's up to you to decide what's the most important for you. And if you don't want to vote for somebody, you shouldn't be shamed into doing so. And I've long decried lesser of two evils voting and all that, even though we've basically been forced into it now for my entire lifetime in American politics. And I think people who are especially younger are very sick of it because they can't even remember, or they're only reading about times when people might have promised to actually do something and had a chance of doing it. So anyway, I think it's going to be a very significant story. We've got independent candidates galore, people like RFK Jr., Cornel West, and who the hell knows? I just saw yesterday Joe Lieberman floated that Nikki Haley could run on the no labels ticket against Trump if she doesn't end up winning the GOP primary.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the more the merrier,
save us
as far as you can ask me.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.